It's Friday, and I'm back with the next in our Fanzine Friday series. Today we're taking a look at Orc's Revenge number 2. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer. This is our channel, Old School Rules, a place for everyone that loves classic RPGs and anyone who'd like to learn more about them. Each week on the Fanzine Friday series, I take a fanzine from my collection off the shelf for a closer look. And today from 1985, this is Orc's Revenge number 2. Hope you enjoyed the video. We're back from the UK, taking a look at this fanzine called Orc's Revenge. This is issue number 2. It's a blue heavy stock cover and then paper folded in half, and they make a point of saying in here, and you'll see as well, they've reduced this time so that the text or the font in here is smaller and you get more sort of content on every page. I think it was a slightly better look. As you'll see on the cover, this is from May of 1985. Pete Rassa does the cover again. I'm pretty sure it says Psychic Art, but I think there's the initials down there at the bottom as well. You sort of get this, I think, skeleton-like creature here crawling up from a grave next to a headstone. At least that's how I interpret what I'm seeing. In terms of content, we've got our editorial table of contents, an article about the Ents, sort of the ecology of the Ent, the setting, the background, the history, how to sort of utilize those in your campaign. Heavily influenced by Middle-earth role-playing and Tolkien, obviously, but as he says, written generically for any sort of fantasy setting. Orc Talk is their letters column, an article on the crossbow and, frankly, the different types of crossbows and how to think about maybe some changes to the rules for crossbows in your D&D campaign. From Beyond, sort of a Call of Cthulhu mini-setting, or maybe even, I'd better say, idea for a setting. Alchemist Larder, new magic items in particular with potions. Circle of Deceit, similar, they call them a cameo. It's sort of like an adventure idea, and this one is for Middle-earth role-playing. Return of the Mayas is a full-blown campaign, a whole bunch of pages, probably about half the fanzine. This one is for heroes, Villains and Vigilantes, Golden Heroes, whatever your superhero RPG might be. Then a discussion of languages, an article for your fantasy campaign on demonic conjuration, rules for drinking and the effects of drinking, 8 Zines Toll, which is information about new Zines, and Meaningless Mutterings is just like miscellaneous information, how to subscribe, make contributions, and so forth. As before, Mac, Gavin, Ken, and Chris are primarily responsible for this. Pete Rassa does some art. They also have some art credit for a guy named Nick Barber. Editorial, they say obviously first thing you'll notice is the adjustment in the format, but they think it's basically giving you the same amount of content. It felt like definitely, even though it's a few less pages, I think this one comes in at 46 instead of 50. You know, it's probably about the same amount of content as last time. It certainly felt that way. Even though obviously a nice mix of things, not all D&D by a long shot. Encouraging people to still send in art, send in contributions, but especially to send in art because they don't have a lot. And they say very upfront, the 4 of them, not artistic, and so they don't really contribute any art to this at all. And then mention all of them will be at Dragon Meet Con that's coming up there in the near future. Here's our table of contents, some art, and a little bit of extra thank yous here on the side, including the Merchant's Tailor printing department, their headmaster, Alistar Woodward, Tom Stacy, Andrew Fisher, Jeremy Nuttall. Here's a really interesting article, I think, on the Ent, written, to explain basically from a Tolkien perspective, like based on that as the background. What are Ents? Where do they come from? Who are the famous ones? What are the different things that they do, sort of how their society works, how you might encounter them, what their predispositions will be, how they feel about the different races in the world, and in particular with the Tolkien bent. So dwarves, elves, orcs, trolls are the primary thing they talk about there. Here's Orc Talk, and this is their letters column. And instead of sort of printing each letter, they sort of seem to have broken up the letters to create a little bit of a conversation feeling. The way they have this organized is sort of by topic or reaction to the different articles that were in the initial one. So they start with Full of Eastern Promise. Remember, that was sort of the Persian, Middle East kind of setting rules that they had come up with that was in issue 1. Interesting. So everyone seemed to like it. So it was in terms of good ideas. Some people really liked all the charts, said they were really helpful. Other people said they didn't think the charts were good and they should have been omitted, just to give us basically some narrative ideas. In terms of the D&D and MERP scenarios, I think the reviews were kind of mixed. People thought they were okay, some good ideas. In particular, I liked that timetable that was in the one that sort of told you what was going to happen as your players played your way through it. People like the nodules. Those the new monster that every time you hit it with an edged weapon, it would cut in half and duplicate itself. Again, very small, low power, but if you keep cutting it, it becomes more and more and more, and suddenly you're fighting instead of 20 or 30 of these things. I think a couple of the letters found that monster confusing. I'm not really sure why they thought it was confusing. I thought it was pretty straightforward myself. But the editor's response is also to say they don't think new monsters is what they want to focus on. They've got other ideas and things to include. And interestingly, they say that this idea of hardware, I think, is what they refer to these things like new monsters, new spells. And they say really they think a lot of people aren't doing hardware anymore. They say Journal of Senseless Carnage Society seems to have changed a little bit. And then they're like, I haven't read. They say TO, I think that's Tempestuous Orifice. But then they're like, but I don't even plan to. I don't know what that little tension is there between the different fanzine guys. But anyway, they think they're going to shy away from that, although they do give you some adventures, as you'll see obviously in this issue. People really liked the article about the different types of daggers. I did too. I thought it was one of the most well thought out articles and would be interesting in a campaign to give you different daggers with different damage abilities, maybe different uses. You have to think about that if you don't use the versus armor class adjustments, which is a big part of what they were doing in there that was changing a little bit on the damage side too. But you'd have to think, if you don't use that versus armor class, you'd have to think a little bit about how to make those daggers more interesting. The article on the cleric, which was the use of different types of weapons, that's been pretty well trod at this point, I think. And like they say, they get it. One guy was like, no, you should just stick to the original rules. Another guy was like, you're really going to have to, if you're going to do it, you got to commit. And then you got to list every deity that could exist in your campaign. You're going to have to separate, weapon-based rules for each of them, etc. I do think it's a weird rule in a way, but I think, again, Gary was a game designer first. And so I think that's really the answer, was he wanted to balance the fact he's giving these people who can wear all the armor some limitations that fighters don't have. Sort of some lukewarm results to their potions and their side effects, and like one guy, Jerry Nuttall, wrote in was just decide, right? You don't need the tables. I like the tables. Sometimes you roll and maybe don't like what you get, so then you decide, I'm going to pick something else. But the idea of giving side effects, I think, is interesting. Now, Gary, you'll recall, only had that happen when you mixed potions, which is definitely a really interesting idea, I think, and one that some people don't pay attention to. Although I don't know that my characters typically, players are using potions like one right after the other very often, so maybe that's why we never really got into that. And then taking the initiative, as I think I said, felt like an article that we'd read before in a lot of ways, right? That same subject and how do you do it and approach to it. And I think their general comment was this particular article wasn't all that interesting or creative. It wasn't like, oh, this is a really interesting way I'd never even thought of or heard before. But in any event, it's good to see they're already in issue 2. They should feel proud of themselves. They were already getting feedback from people, because a lot of issue 1 did not generate that kind of feedback, because you can tell in the later issues it took them 2 or 3 issues before people gave them feedback. Okay, so then we have an article, Deathly and Hateful to God. They quote a historical text talking about the crossbow. And I think they make a pretty fair point here, which is, why in the world would any player ever choose a crossbow strategically? Because it does the same or less damage than a regular bow and is somewhere between half and 3-4 times as slow in terms of fire rate. And so they have 2 comments about that. One, a little bit of historical information, why the crossbow became popular, how they actually worked, and then some proposed multiple types of crossbows and restatted, doing 2 things. One, increasing the rate of fire for a number of those, and also for those that are going to take a long time to crank back because they're really heavy, giving them a much higher damage rating. So there's a trade-off, between getting less bolts or arrows fired but doing more damage when you when you actually manage to get that done. Next, we have a little Call of Cthulhu. They call them a cameo. It's sort of an idea of how a Cthulhu adventure might get kicked off. Here's Alchemist's Larder. It's new potions and other magical items. So first we have potions. The Potion of Precision. I like this one. It gives you basically plus, maybe it's a little too much, but +3 to hit and on damage, missile or melee, or +3 to hit, double damage on a natural 19 or 20, and +3 to hit is missile or melee, and then +1 to initiative. And after it wears off, then you have penalties that are half of that. So -2 to hit, -1 on initiative. Then we have the Potion of Titanic Strength. Gives you the strength of a Titan, but the intelligence of 4. And says basically you'll only react to sort of basic urges. You won't have any kind of logical thought. And so you really need to role play that and limit the person's ability to make any kind of rational decision. And the Potion of Hallucination, which looks like a potion of precision in all ways, but then what it does is actually cause mirror images. One, you need to roll a d4 to see how many additional images the imbiber will see of any enemies when he goes to enter in combat. And then it's basically a mirror image spell where you randomly hit one of those images, one of which, of course, is the real person. And we have two. We have a berry and an herb. The Gorn berry, which is for these are for MERP, lets you go essentially into the astral plane, a spirit realm, and move through the spirit realm for 1d20 rounds. And then the Varana root, which basically gives you like a haste spell, extra high, extra far jumping ability. And that's, of course, that's for MERP, but then it also, that would work like that for D&D. Circle of Deceit. This is, again, they call them cameos. They're sort of like adventure ideas, one-page adventure ideas. And this one is for Middle-earth role-playing. And here we have these caravans going between Rivendell and Bree that keep disappearing. And so the party's going to be charged to go and try and figure out that mystery, and you'll find a group of bandits who are, in fact, the Black Numenorian sorcerers. So anyway, good. I like this idea, like that, just sort of like, I don't know if you call it adventure hook or adventure sketch outline, and then let the DM or the referee flesh it out. So here's a really interesting, very large adventure, Return of the Mayas, which is for a superhero game. Again, statted for Villains and Vigilantes, but also alternate stats given here for Golden Heroes. But the idea is you'd use this for some type of superhero. So this one starts out with a tale of an ancient intergalactic battle between two races, and the emperor from one of these races has landed on Earth, the last vestige of his race, and they've hidden themselves deep underground. The other army gives up on them. They go into they say talk with the Mayans, but they're in the Peruvian Andes, which means probably that would be the Incas, just sort of keeping the cultures straight there. But in any event, they're deep underground, and then in modern times, this guy with this sorcerer sort of guy, bad guy, has figured out clues about where they are and what they are, and so he mounts this archaeological excavation in Peru, and then they disappear. And so the superheroes are brought in because they become aware of this disappearance, and they're going to go to the location and try to find out what happened to this group. Yet they don't know the background. And so we've got like this little village in this cave you can get into, and then we've got the island of Charon the Black. That's the bad guy that you guys can explore through. Now, again, I think it's interesting to see these different type of role-playing games covered in these fanzines. You don't see a ton of that. Here's Languages in Fantasy Role-Playing Games by Gavin Cameron. Basically talking about different types of languages you might want to include. The first one he talks about is sign language. And so he talks about the historical origins of sign language, meaning that it wasn't something done for people who were deaf, but rather it was probably done between people who wanted to communicate, like maybe a thieves guild or assassins guild would have developed some type of silent form of communication to use during nefarious activities. And the other language he wants to talk about is the Speak with Plants spell. And says people kind of wonder, like, oh, how the heck does that work? Because a plant, doesn't have a mouth, doesn't have vocal cords. He said he resolves that by thinking of sort of the Japanese idea that every living creature has some type of a spirit that's connected to it. And so when you cast a spell, you communicate with the spirit. I've always felt like, and he does say this, plants don't have the large vocabulary. They can sort of give more simple impressionistic communication to someone, not a full verbose conversation like we can have. But in any event, those are his two ideas, which is kind of interesting. Languages, I thought he was really going to dig into something in a different direction when I first saw that headline. Next, we have everyone's favorite from the time of the Satanic Panic. Let's talk about demonic conjuration. So, as he points out, the game talks about demons and devils and angels and all these extraplanar creatures, but doesn't give a lot of detail about how you go about interacting, or in this case, summoning some of those folks to the prime material plane. So the first thing he comes up with is the fact you have to know a particular plane in order to summon something from it. He comes up with a demonist, which apparently is a new class, clerics, magic users, and druids. Based on your level, then there's a number of planes you can know about. So a druid has to be 7th level to learn about their first plane. They can only get up to 8, whereas a demonist would learn about his or her first plane at 1st level and can learn up about as many as 15. Druids are more limited, earth, fire, water, that kind of thing. Clerics have to start with the plane where their deity lives, and then they can move on. Magic users and demonists can choose any plane they want each time they get to add one. Then he's got pentagrams, whether it's your personal pentagram, a warding pentagram, so like, keep something out, keep something in. And then he goes through the different type of spells you would use to bring something to the prime material plane. He has ideas here about the reaction you're going to get when you summon something against its will to this plane, which, typically when you read these things in fantasy novels, not happy, right? Not happy to be forced to summon here, whether you can bind them, force them to perform some type of service or task for you or not. So again, I think not something I've really gone into sort of role-playing through that, but I do like that idea, and I think if you wanted to do that, or your characters are going to do that, or maybe you have a particular character who does that as like his or her like special thing they like to do, you do need some more meat on the bone. You need some understanding of how exactly this is going to work, as well as the risks, right? Because the fantasy literature at least makes clear that kind of thing is never without risk. Even if you bind it, it's always looking for a way to get free. If it does, it's usually looking for a way to get back at you as soon as possible. And then finally, he's got the counterpoint here, binding and banishing, right? The ability to either hold this summoned creature in a particular spot or to banish it back to its home plane and get it off of the prime material plane. So interesting stuff, I think. Very well thought out article. A lot of people sort of shy away, and obviously, TSR got rid of sort of all the demonic stuff as they move forward in reaction to that Satanic Panic. There's a questionnaire in here. They ask you to copy it or rip it out or photocopy it and send it back. Information about yourself. How did you get your copy? Did you like your copy? What did you like? What do you want to see? That kind of thing. Now, drinking. If I remember correctly, Jaquays maybe had an article about the effects of intoxication really early on in one of the issues of the Dungeoneer. But this is for MERP, but generally applicable to any fantasy role-playing game. And the idea is, as character goes to the local inn or tavern, decides to start consuming. If you want to role-play into that, you start keeping track. You start having effects on their physical abilities, mental processing, and that kind of stuff. The more they drink, the worse it gets. They also have some ideas for some things that you could get to help you sober up in terms of berries and herbs and stuff like that in Middle-earth role-playing. All right, now one of my favorite parts of any zine is their discussion of other fanzines that they have got copies of. It both gives us information about things maybe don't know as much about, and gives us some ideas about what people at the time thought about the different publications that were out there. So we'll cover each of these in turn. The first one he has is Fiery Cross, issue 4. He said he had an earlier issue as well. Really likes this one. Thinks it's very well done. Has articles from a number of people. It's a sort of a cross between hardware and chat. Issue 4 had a Warhammer adventure in it. Jez Keane, who contributes, edits Next Stop Jupiter. That's a fanzine. Paul Mason, and he edits a zine called Amazine, I think. Amazine, maybe. I only have one or two of those. I've been trying to collect those for a long time, and they've been pretty hard to find. Paul Mason, Jeremy Nuttall, and Tony Keane, who has a zine called Obscurity, Inc. The next one he talks about is Dead Elf, and he has issue 4 of that. It says it's gotten quite a bit better, and has now a co-editor, Graham Anderson, is helping out. And he mentions that this one has a adventure for laser burn and also for Call of Cthulhu, which he suggests is getting more and more popular in the UK right now. Art by Hudson Shaw. He's one of my favorite fanzine artists. And so he thinks it's a good recommendation, especially because he sees the fanzine getting better and better. All right, well, it's not all love and sunshine here. So the next one is Hocus Pocus. Here we go. The first thing that strikes you when you pick up this zine is the severe lack of pages, only 16. Next, the appalling cover. Then the appalling inside production, and so on ad infinitum. I cannot imagine why the editor bothered to produce this zine. 4 articles that are short, boring, and scrappy, and 4 ridiculously pathetic cartoons. The best thing in this zine was the model shop advertisement. So, Hocus Pocus, not his favorite. Next is Runestone, which is obviously for RuneQuest. He has issue number 6 here that he's talking about. He says more of a chat zine, which he likes, and thinks the quality of this has gotten a lot better. It also has, in addition to the RuneQuest stuff, it has something for Call of Cthulhu, which again he says is really popular. Something called Norse Quest, which is Bill's RuneQuest variant, and an article on Sonics Metasonics. Again, he thinks this one is a good buy. Next, we have Demon's Draw. Again, he talked about that one last time. This is Demon's Draw number 11 by Jeremy Nuttall. He said, this is fandom at its best. Good printing, good articles, and he says it's so good it almost sort of makes you feel like maybe you shouldn't try because how can you do something better? But in any event, clearly lots of people were, and I'm glad they were because the stuff is really good. He says we have a couple of good articles here. One's on magic users based on the Earthsea trilogy by Ursula Le Guin. Then Hudson Shaw has an article about dragons and folklore. Good letters pages, interesting discussion, an AD&D scenario, which is, fine, nothing special but good. And other several really good columns. This is an introduction to Empire of the Petal Throne, which at this point they call an obscure game. Remember, at one point Gary called that an even better version of D&D. But quickly that one falls sort of by the wayside. Reviews of other zines, an article on artwork, more information about Citadel figures, short stories, and he said, and they added a play-by-mail supplement. Worth every penny, highest possible recommendation. And finally, he wants to tell you about Orc's Revenge, as if you didn't already know about it. And he wants to tell you that he thinks Orc's Revenge number 1 was a very good first issue of a new fanzine. And he literally goes in and tells you what was in that fanzine. I guess to encourage you to buy the back issue. I mean, he literally has, it's a page and a half review of their own fanzine in here. I have never seen someone do that before. He tells you about all the different articles, why he likes them, why they were good, as if he didn't have anything to do with its production. He also says he had a couple other ones he wanted to do, but he couldn't put his hands on them at the moment. He does talk about Blood, Guts, and Beer that he's hoping to get in. Superhero UK and something called Wolfsbane. Again, this is one of those things where they're trying to do the trades, right? He sends them his fanzine, and these guys are supposed to send one back, and that way they sort of share them with each other to increase the, circulation and discussion about them. Good stuff. Here's the last page, meaningless mutterings. It's just advertising, subscription, all that kind of stuff. Then there's an advertisement for the model shop and some artwork. This guy liked the breasts, and here's a little dragon. And let me get it myself out of the way. And this angry looking dude was in the adventure. Here's the back page. It says, Dorona the Horny says, I read Orc's Revenge. That's our look at Orc's Revenge, number 2 from May of 1985. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Hope you're enjoying this series, and I hope you're subscribed. If you have friends who might enjoy our content, please send them our way, and hopefully they will be subscribers as well. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. Play some RPGs with your friends. And until next time, keep rolling 20s.